Level. Fighting. All right. Gandhi. Chile. I'm alive. Level. God, Chile. Level. Good morning, everybody. Now, I know that I have a couple of minutes earlier than usual, but I also see that some of you are here. So, we're going to take the time, get comfy. Okay. All right. Now, give that a shot. Take down the background noises a notch. Okay. Good morning, everybody. So we got a couple of minutes. Don't let's cheat those who will come at 9:45. But if you do have access to Fela, you have the library, try and go listen to Akuna. It's been such a wonderful listen this morning. But he did sing about something that I think we can share before the others join us. Fela defined Nigeria as a country of pain. Country of pain. And when you imagine that song was written over 30 years ago, and nothing would appear to have changed since that time, if anything, the pain would appear to have deepened. You begin to wonder if there is any salvation for us as a collective. And yet, we must find a way to save ourselves. So, just another minute, you tolerate me. Beauty is, we cannot hear. Oh, by the way, let me share the gossip with you. So, you know, I couldn't be with you live last week. It was Elon Musk. So, since I switched to his network, yes, we've had this stability. But then they failed to send me the invoice for me to pay my subscription. 4 months, 4 months actually in a row. I'm told that is completely unusual, but they just didn't send me an invoice. So I couldn't pay the subscription. And then they yanked me off on Friday evening of all the time to do that. They yanked me off. Can you believe that? Then I had to go and be scrambling around, finding a way to upload the stream, which was why I couldn't come to you with Tiptoeing Around the North as a live broadcast. And I missed that. But it's good to be back with you this week. It's 9:45 now. For those of you who come in early, this is the time when we start talking about the week that was. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the week that was, it's actually the time when we look at the events of the past week. In some cases, I tend to play catch up because I don't follow the news. But whatever news catches my attention during the course of the past week, I'll come around, we'll talk about it, but not to titillate ourselves, but as a way to open the window to understand the kind of country that you and I are living in. So in the week that was, I have to go back to the Catholic bishops. I have no choice because the week was full of all kinds of reactions, from the sublime to the mundane, from the ridiculous to the frankly nauseating. It was in the course of that week that I had to listen to, unfortunately, I found myself caught up listening to the guy they call Adegbite. I think he's the chairman of the CAN in Lagos. Some sort of rebuttal was offered. Something like that should never have been issued by a man who claims to have been called in the name of God. He was sickening to behold. I'm told he's the executive secretary of the Pilgrims Welfare Board or something. So evidently he has a seat at the table. And it would have been better not to talk whilst he was eating, not to offer the kind of window he opened into exactly what has befallen the Nigerian clergy, which is why what the Catholic bishops did in the last week came across as unusual. And that is why telling the truth has become such a dangerous occupation in the country that we call Nigeria. But in the course of that week, Bishop Emeritus Onayekan's receipts also came into the public space. The things he had to say in the days of Abacha, the things he had to say in the days of Abdulsalami, of Obasanjo, of Yaradua, the days of Jonathan, in the days of Buhari. So you see, the thing about telling the truth is that there is a constancy to the truth. The truth teller has no need for a good memory. All you have to do is simply tell the truth. So to the likes of Onayekan, who do not require good memories but simply continue being who they were called to be, I applaud you. I'm usually one of the very first to condemn the clergy when it equivocates as the Nigerian clergy is wont to. But when we do have forthright men who speak forthrightly without fear of men, but resonating with the fear of God, then we must acknowledge them. So once again, when you have the like of Adegbite telling us and showing us everything a clergy should not be, we should also learn to applaud those who exemplify the office of the clergy. So that's as far as that goes for now. In the course of the last week, the Osun debacle deepened, and we saw the spectacle of the EFCC chairman being directed by the presido to cease with the persecution in Osun State. But then, those who trust in the mercy of Satan will eventually have their hopes quashed. But the importance of that directive is the window it opens. It shows you clearly that there is nothing independent about the independent EFCC. Absolutely nothing independent about it. It also offers you a window into exactly how these federal agencies work. Each and every one of them are either smelling the body odor of the president, watching the body language of the president, or taking directives from a person purportedly speaking on behalf of the president in pursuit of power. That is the reality of our existence. So the EFCC has been called to heel. We'll see how far that goes. But the question is this: if Ade the dancer had actually served the people, if his tenure has been about service to the people of Osun State, my home state, why would he need to worry about anything done by Tinubu and his crew? It is the disconnect between the ruled and the rulers that has allowed the room for the madness that has permeated our society. But again, that is merely for you to have a window into the week that was. But there's something that troubles me. In the immediate aftermath of the release of the children at Orire in Ogbomoso, there was deservedly widespread backslapping, and everybody were busy congratulating themselves, rightly so, and we all rejoiced that these children have been released. The post-mortem has been abandoned. The fact that the governor was calling for a probe, an inquiry, investigation into the remote and immediate causes of what happened and how it was resolved, all these, of course, do not matter anymore because we live from outrage to outrage. And the reality is that it is the outrage that is brought before the people that they focus on at any point in time. And just before they are done wrapping their brains around that particular outrage, something else is always bound to come up, or something else that was forgotten must again be examined. 176 human beings, mostly children, were abducted in February. 13 of those children died. That was in Woro. Ten pregnant women gave birth in captivity. There are still 12 women and children in captivity. Over 17,000 people have fled their villages and towns. All of these in Kayama. That's Professor Perogi's neighborhood in Kwara State. The reality is that Nigerians have become overwhelmed by bad news to the point where we instinctively flinch away from embracing the reality of our sickening country. We pretend like if we do not engage with it, it would go away. These are delusions. They are still children kept in prison by terrorists, whom we would euphemistically refer to as bandits. These people are probably ruling more space in Nigeria today than the government of Nigeria. They collect taxes. Sometimes they take crop. They have the liberty to sleep with people's wives. Multiple stories abound of the supremacy of bandits, terrorists in vast parts. All our forests are ungoverned spaces, and we do have quite a few of those. I'm merely using what has happened in Kayaba, which is happening almost all everywhere across the country, north, east, west, and south, to show you the things that we have deliberately ignored, perhaps hoping that it will disappear simply because we have refused to engage with it. But as the Yorubas will say, "Ọmọ tí gbàgbé iṣẹ́, ọtí dá, iṣẹ́ ò lọ." The drunk, inebriated, forgets his poverty. But when he regains sobriety, poverty remains with him. No matter how long we continue to pretend that these realities are different from what they are, the windows continue to open into how persons pretty much like me and you have become prisoners. It is even, I think it is fair to say that we have multiple powers in Nigeria now. The government takes hostages and the terrorists take hostages. And then in the week that was, another Yoruba proverb was brought home for me. I've had occasion to use it before when the Kaduna train was derailed. And it is the one that says that the children you refuse to train will destroy and sell the houses that you have built. Nigeria has engaged in madness. It has sown insanity, and it is going to be reaping lunacy. In the course of that week, a video surfaced of bridges that were being taken apart by persons who were looking to harvest the iron that were inside the columns. Think about that. A bridge with columns. And human beings decided in quote, that the best thing they could do was to compromise the structural integrity of the bridge by removing the iron inside the column. Now, inside that assertion I just made, they decided to compromise. That is part of the idiocy that has come to govern our society because we have detached ourselves from our objective realities. They took no decisions. Hunger, let me say it this way, rationality ends where hunger begins. Me and you can afford to take decisions. These persons are not taking decisions. They are responding viscerally to hunger. The fact that the bridge will collapse after they had harvested the iron did not register in their consciousness. And this is the exact same way multiple other evils that are being done at the expense of the larger society by individuals do not register in their heads as they do it. There is absolutely nothing different as between the iron condemned boy and the rulers of Nigeria who cares nothing for the consequences of the choices they make in ruling the country. So when we are busy, outraged by what these iron condemned persons are doing, let us also ask ourselves, how many of them have we already condemned before they began to fish for condemned iron out of the columns of bridges. How many such bridges have been compromised across the country, particularly in Lagos? Who has taken a audit of these bridges? And when they are done taking these audits, how much would be stolen in an under the column of bridge maintenance? So when you are busy dealing with the outrage caused by the iron condemn removing the iron from the columns under the bridge, think of all the columns that have equally been removed from the lives of the iron condemned in terms of education not provided. They removed the iron in his life. In terms of healthcare not offered, they removed the iron in his life. In terms of abandonment, the iron in his life had been removed, so he was also busy removing the iron, which served no purpose for him. He doesn't use the bridge. The bridge has only one value: salvageable iron. And why are you people even surprised? I remember during the End Bad Governance protest, I think that was in 2024, 2025. I think it was 2024, when youth in Kano were breaking pavements and culverts in order to harvest the iron to be resold as scrap. Rationality ends where hunger begins. Let this society take a good look at itself. And whilst it is busy condemning those who have already been condemned by society that has failed to build them as human resource, understand that the children you fail to train will destroy the house that you might have built. Nigeria has an army of youth undirected to purpose, unaffected by vision, directed almost solely to perversion in the country that has grown devoid of purpose. Purpose is what constrains. That is what that window is telling us. In the absence of purpose, the bridges you built when you failed to build schools will be stripped by those in search of the iron that you failed to put in them. So that is that about the week that was. If you're just joining us, good morning. I would strongly suggest that you find the time to catch the earlier part of our ta. We do our best not to just waste the breath. But this morning, I would like to continue the theme that I started last week. I spoke last week to tiptoeing around the north. Now, because it wasn't a live show, I did miss you guys. The context of explanations that I would have offered as I would start my lecture was also lost. I was forced to just focus solely on placing the message on the table. But here is the thing. I have found that one of the biggest challenges we have as a collective is an inability to confront ourselves with the hard truth. I aim to do that. And that was what I set out to do with tiptoeing around the north. And I have noticed that quite a number of persons, particularly of northern extraction, took exception to a lot of things I had to say. And I'm happy to see that. I'm always happy to provoke you. You see, my duty is not to make you feel good with yourself. It is my self-appointed duty to offend you with the truth, so that when you are offended, you begin to examine what had been said and then find justification or repent. And that is my intendment at all times. And this is why I try my best. I'm not perfect, but I try my best to make sure that I afflict you with the truth. And because the Spirit of God is in you, you have no choice but to recognize the truth when it is told to you. So if I have offended you, take the time. Look to the things I have said. Wherever I have lied, point it out. That is the effective criticism that I desire. Wherever I have lied, point it out. So this morning, we're going to be tiptoeing around the middle belt. And I think it is important that we deal with definitions. What is the middle belt? I think it is safe to say that the middle belt is the buffer zone that exists between the Muslim far north and the majority Christian southern part of Nigeria. Geographically, this part of Nigeria is smack bang in the middle of Nigeria, and it's more or less like a belt, which is why it is generally referred to as the middle belt. It is also sometimes referred to as the north central, even though that is a little more restrictive, and it is difficult to understand exactly where. Somebody just distracted me with something about lost audio. I know that I have sound. So Chizo 1034, you are either a bot of the state or something else is wrong with you. I have audio. My system is telling me. So thank you and bot off. So it's not the same thing as the North Central, but maybe because of the convenience of that nomenclature, it is also referred to as the North Central. But what is more important for all of us to understand these days? What is generally referred to as the Middle Belt today is the part of what we generally refer to as Northern Nigeria that were never conquered by the Fulani jihadists. So the Middle Belt consists of probably well over 100 ethnicities. When the jihadists, that's the Danfodio jihad, when they were coming towards the south, you must remember that slave trading was the biggest inducement for the Fulani raids. And if these persons were Islamized, what you would find is that Islamic jurisprudence would mean that they could not be enslaved. So the Fulanis had multiple strategies. In places like Kotangora, Suleja, Lafia, and most other parts, they built garrison towns. These garrison towns were essentially used as staging points from where to raid the communities surrounding them for slaves. These garrisons were planted in easily defensible spaces for the Fulani horsemen. And essentially, by the time the British came, these garrisons became centers, administrative centers for the British colonists. Now, you need to understand that the British system of indirect rule thrived essentially on minimal intervention by British officers in the administration of the colonized territory. So when the British came, they found the emirate system of the Fulanese and they found the Kanem Borno Empire, both in the space that we generally refer to as Northern Nigeria today. But it was on top of the existing emirate system, the Fulani Caliphate in Sokoto. It was on top of this that the British layered the colonial administration. So vast parts that were never conquered by the Fulanis came under the administrative chokehold of the emirate system as a function of indirect rule. This created a situation where places where the Fulanis never conquered, Persons who view the Fulanis essentially as slave traders and raiders, subjugators, developed very strong identities, largely based on the Christianization that was allowed to take place in those areas, whilst whilst Christian evangelists, the colonial evangelists, were not allowed in the Emirates. They could operate in what is today generally referred to as the Middle Belt. So you found that a lot of nations in the Middle Belt embraced Christianity as a matter of identity, mostly to differentiate themselves from those who had, prior to the coming of the colonies, were enslaving them. By the time the colonial administration became entrenched, what had happened is that the design of the colonies ensured that a northern identity was forced on persons who were nothing, who saw themselves as not part of that north, but they were administratively coerced into that north. And that now began to create a situation where conscious persons such as Ahmadu Bello, who had a northernization agenda, saw utility in making sure that what is today consciously referred to as the Middle Belt was seen as the North. So, by a process of elite cooptation, by a process of Islamist patronage and infiltration, what you found was that the elite class in what we now call the Middle Belt found a lot of utility in staying with Ahmadu Bello and the NPC. And this was the case in the early days as the colonial administration was becoming more and more entrenched. But as independence became a subject of discourse in the early 50s, late 40s, early 50s, you saw the emergence of collectives such as the Middle Zone of David Lott. The Middle Zone of David Lott was afraid of the fear. They had a fear of the Fulani continuing to dominate them in a system that had been put together by the British. So they began to develop the Middle Belt identity. In developing the Middle Belt identity, they started, as I said, with the Middle Zone. The Middle Zone at inception was largely comprised of persons from the Plateau and southern Kaduna, which were largely populated by minority groups who were also Christians. In a few years down the line, maybe like a couple of years thereafter, a political collective known as the Middle Belt People's Party also came together. This one was largely for the thieves and others. Taka, Joseph Sozan Taka, united the two and formed the Middle Belt Congress, the Middle Belt People's Congress. I believe that was in 1947. Now, I have taken the time to explain this because when I spent last week talking about tiptoeing around the North, I realized that a lot of times we all sit down and we subsume the Middle Belt, both its political interest and his economic interest beneath the North. That was how my generation was brought up and conditioned. We rarely saw the Middle Belt as an entity on its own. The North, we were encouraged to believe, was one homogeneous, monolithic, single one. But when these people came together, their primary worry was about the domination of the Fulani of their nationalities. And what they were looking for was the independence of the Middle Belt. They wanted a region of their own. That region that they wanted was the basis for the cooperation they found with the Action Group. Susan Tucker and Obafemi Awolowo began to collaborate. When I said tiptoeing around the Middle Belt, if you do not understand the history of the Middle Belt, you will not understand the conclusions that I have drawn and that I intend to speak to. And this is why I'm taking the roundabout trip of giving you the historical background. The preoccupation of Middle Belt activists was to ensure that they freed their people from the domination of the Fulani Emirates. The Emirate system, the native authority, all these agitations were demands for self-determination. Every Nigerian struggle is essentially one for self-determination. Because citizenship has never evolved in this country, we seek self-determination in the ethnic nationality. And in seeking self-determination in ethnic nationality, we discount the citizenship and individual rights of the persons who live within the Nigerian space and persons presumed to speak on behalf of our ethnic nations, and then silence our voices as individuals. And then some idiot somewhere will sit down and stereotypically capture everybody together as though they be one. What is the relevance? The Middle Belt began to agitate simply because of his worries and the reality of his domination by the Fulanis. And in this agitation, they found resonance in the South. The resonance they found in the South threatened the foundation of the Nigerian state as it was constructed in 1950s up until independence. And I would explain, and this is why I say we are tiptoeing around the Middle Belt. Nigeria was found on the assumption of three legs: the North, the East, and the West. When this assumption was on the table, it was also founded from the beginning that the representation and electoral power of the North would be equal only to a combination of the East and the West, which is why at inception, when you had 32 members of the Legislative Council, 16 will be from the North, 8 from the West, 8 from the East. So the North always held a virtual veto, which meant that all they required at any point in time is a single seat in the South, whether that be from the East or from the West. Once they had that single seat, everything was fine. Now, when it could not be guaranteed any longer because of the rebellion of the Middle Belt, his demand for his own identity, his own voice, the right to determine what happens to his people, in his fight to break away from Fulani hegemony, it found alliances in the AG. You would have heard of the Boko uprising, the TV riots. The Middle Belt was in turmoil, and it had broken away politically from the Northern People's Congress of Ahmadu Bello. So it could not, the Northern People's Congress could no longer look to the monolithic appropriation, or to the appropriation of the vote from a monolithic North. This was what triggered the crisis in the Western region. If Obafemi Awolowo will give succor to those looking to break the hegemony of the Fulanis, they too must find a way to break the hegemony of Obafemi Awolowo in the southwest, in the west. So Ahmadu Bello found an alliance with Akintola in the west. They had to replace what had been taken in the Middle Belt. That was the beginning of the crisis that eventually led to the collapse of the First Republic. Now, sometimes this thing seems disconnected, but I'll try and connect it for you. After the first coup, with the killings of the northern officers, the first thing that began to form among those who plotted the second coup was secession. So by the time the coup of July 1966 took place, the first cry that issued out of Ikeja cantonment was very simple: Araba. They wanted to secede. It was the persuasion of the British diplomats and the Americans that led Murtala Muhammad and I believe Martin Adamu. Those were the original planners. It was the two of them that were declaring support for secession before the British and the Americans stepped into it and then told them, you are wise. If you're wise, you will simply take the country that you have won. But to take the country that had been won, politics also had to be played. And that is where the unintended consequence of where we are today and why we are tiptoeing around the Middle Belt took place. A people who had been fearful of Fulani domination, who had been looking to break away from the Emirate system, suddenly became the beneficiary of unitary powers. Murtala Muhammad could not head the country, Nigeria. He was junior in rank. Enough persons of seniority were ahead of him. So the most senior officer of northern extraction, since we're always talking about one north, which was Gowon, became the head of state. When Gowon became the head of state, Gowon, of course, dragged the person who was the best friend of the Middle Belt prior to this time. Obafemi Awolowo came out of prison, and Obafemi Awolowo became quite influential in that government. And that was where the Middle Belt began his own games. A people who had been afraid of the Fulani hegemony simply took the Nigerian state and took it from 4 regions and cut it up into 12 states. Out of that 12 states, 3 were from the Middle Belt: North Central, the Benue Plateau State, and Kwara State. So you had 3 states accounting for the Middle Belt. You had 3 states accounting for what you call the far north. You had 3 states accounting for the east, the old eastern region, and you had 3 states accounting for the old western region. So the Middle Belt, with all its many officers within the officer corps, was an effective power, but instead of liberating all of us to give us citizenship, it simply appropriated advantages, restructured the country to resolve what it thought was its own problem. The Middle Belt, that was fearful of Fulani domination, became quite adept at playing the game of power. And Nigeria was effectively restructured exactly how the Fulani would have wanted it. Unitary power concentrated in the center. Derivation was no longer fashionable, and the Middle Belt became everything it feared. Nigeria was restructured in the image of the feudal lords. Today, you do not have the privacy of citizenship. Tribes, ethnicities were hidden behind to design a country that is devoid of citizens. The Middle Belt became complicit in erecting a system of injustice. The same thing that it had spent his entire time fighting by the time power came into the hand of the Middle Belt through Yakubu Gowon. It became everything it had criticized. Federal character, water systems, each and every one of the isms came into life either during the reign of somebody or the other from the Middle Belt. Babangida was of Middle Belt, is of Middle Belt extraction. Abdusalami Abubakar. These have been persons who historically were victims of Fulani overreach and feudalism. But they, more than anyone else, helped to erect the feudal system that today ruins Nigeria. The emergence of Gowon killed any chance of a country founded on citizenship because it became devalued. And more, what you have is a paradox that Gowon is the ultimate constructor of the northern hegemony that continues to persevere in Nigeria today. The Middle Belt was front and center in the Civil War. Without his officer corps, the Civil War would not have been won by the Nigerian side. Almost like 6 out of every 10 officers in the Nigerian army at the outbreak of the Civil War of Middle Belt extraction. The first Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant Colonel Akana, who was Chief of Army Staff to Gowon, he died in an helicopter crash. It was a Middle Belt extraction. Till Ejo, who succeeded him, even though people will say he's of Midwest, yeah, but the northern part, more or less, Ejo is geographically a Middle Belt man. He was the next Chief of Army Staff. After him, you had T.Y. Danjuma. Without T.Y. Danjuma, you wouldn't have Nigeria as it is today. He was the one in Ibadan with Ironsi. At every point in time, whilst this evil empire was being constructed, persons of Middle Belt extractions have been at the table, part and parcel of the construction of that evil. All through the years of Buhari, of Obasanjo, the likes of David Mark were there. The Benue Trough remains a killing field. You heard Mufwang speaking on behalf of the Middle Belt at the reception where the president was in a hurry to leave at the airport, saying how people were just looking to embarrass the president. It is critical that we speak to these ills so that we may understand very clearly that this has very little to do with ethnicity. It has more to do with the conscious choices of persons who presume to speak on behalf of ethnic nations, even while they were busy feathering their own nests. No part of Nigeria is free of guilt. There's a song we used to sing when I was in the university. We will look at ourselves as we sat at the Congress ground and we'll be singing, Gbogbo wọn náà lọ́wọ́ ń bẹ, gbogbo wọn náà lọ́wọ́ ń bẹ, bí Nàìjíríà ti ṣe bàjẹ́, gbogbo wọn náà lọ́wọ́ ń bẹ. It means, oh, they are all guilty. Why Nigeria is the way it is, they are all guilty. And then we'll proceed to name them. We'll name Obasanjo, we'll name Babangida. So Babangida na lọ́wọ́ ń bẹ, Abacha na lọ́wọ́ ń bẹ. So we would ascribe and allocate blames to these different persons. But the reality is that We are all to blame. It has become rather fashionable to say, oh, it's the Yorubas. It's because it's Tinubu that is in power. But the question is, how have the Yorubas benefited from his reign? He has only brought ruination upon our people. A people who could once speak proudly as to their Omoluabi nature have been forever silenced by the guilt of association. So I am deliberate about going all around Nigeria because we must also be deliberate about looking at ourselves as a collective. We who call ourselves Nigerians, when you're busy pointing at how the Fulanis have destroyed Nigeria, or you're busy pointing at how the Hausas have destroyed Nigeria, have you looked in the mirror and wondered exactly how your own part, your own self, have equally been part of the rot? We tiptoe around because we do not want to offend. But I'm not interested in mollycoddling your sensibilities. I want to offend. So even though I said I will be tiptoeing, it is not my intention to mollycoddle. I want to step on your toes, march on your toes with the shoes of truth. Tiptoeing around the middle belt is simply to tell the people of the middle belt that part of the troubles were contributed by them, just like my people also contributed, just like your people also contributed. It will take all of us to change this situation. It will take all of us. Just me, just one man. And in this week that passed, I was reminded of my own mortality. A dear, dear friend was buried. He lived a good life, but he died, just as I would, just as you all will at some point or the other. It is what we do whilst we are here that can affect the life that we live and that can affect those who come behind. Stop tiptoeing around the truth. Be like our brother, Bishop Onoyekon. Speak the truth, even when your voice shakes. Speak it. I must not go away today failing to remember and call all of you to remember Bichi, the one you popularly know as Meshango. Meshango is an Hausa activist who is looking to assert the voice of the Hausas in Nigeria. I am of the firm opinion that whilst Nigeria was said to have been independent, given its independence in 1960, the reality is that northern Nigeria has never been independent. And the lack of independence in northern Nigeria has strengthened the chains of imprisonment, of enslavement for the rest of Nigeria. Whilst the Hausas are the majority ethnicity in what we call northern Nigeria, they have been largely silenced because their voices have been subsumed beneath the traditional authority of their Fulani overlord. They are now seeking to find their voice, just as every other part of Nigeria, every individual in Nigeria must find its voice. It behooves all of us who are desirous of freedom to call for the freedom of Meshango from DSS captivity. If he has committed any crime, by all means, charge him to court. Tiptoeing around the truth got us into the mess we are in. And if we are going to come out of this mess, it will be because we refuse to tiptoe. Last week, we tiptoed around the north. This week, we've tiptoed around the middle belt. We got three more waka to waka. As the spirit leads, I'll decide where we are going next week. We might be tiptoeing around the west. or I might save my people for last. Or we might just tiptoe around Allah Igbo and let me go and offend my Oriental brothers. Or I might go to the land that we now call the South South, the land of the Shekiris, the Jaws, the Euro. I think it's safe to call, yeah, the Urobos, the Bilbils. We will be meeting very soon. Wherever I come, I shall try my best to come bearing the truth. I will offend you, and that's fine. I'm an equal opportunity offender. I enjoy that. But the only thing I will not do is lie against you. If Nigeria is going to get better, it's going to be because we all admit to our parts in its ruination. And then we all stepped up to do our part. So I'm going to see you next week. And whatever else you do or do not do, remember this. When you find the grace to subjectify the truth, when you find the idiocy to subjectifies the truth, you ruin society. If it is true for A, it must be true for B. The standards must never shift. That is the beauty of societies that grow without losing their steel. I'm going to see you all next week. Stay safe. God bless.